to speak out. We can tell the truth of what we've seen. We are not liars.
Welcome to the Veterans Hour, a monthly program produced by the Rachel Corrie Chapter 109 Veterans for Peace in Olympia, Washington. I'm Mark Fleming, here with my colleague Dennis Mills, and we are your hosts for this program. Veterans for Peace is a global organization of military veterans and allies whose collective efforts build a culture of peace. As Veterans for Peace, we bring a unique and important voice to the issues of war and peace. We inform the public of the true causes and enormous costs of war, and emphasize our nation's obligation to heal the wounds of war. The Rachel Corrie Chapter in Olympia is one of over 140 Veterans for Peace chapters throughout the world, whose work includes educating the public, advocating for dismantling of the war economy, providing services that assist veterans and victims of war, and most significantly, working to end all wars. This program focuses on, or the Veterans Hour focuses on veterans and veterans issues and matters of war and peace. This program examines some of the issues that the Rachel Corrie Chapter has addressed during 2019 and issues that may loom large in the coming year. But before we get started, we think it's appropriate to give a shout out to Thurston Community Media, who makes this program possible. Dennis, you've worked with them?
Yes, Thurston Community Media is also known as Thurston Community Television. And formerly, but it's more than just television today. But we really want to thank Thurston Community Media for providing a space for us to have our voices heard, because not many voices are heard today on the television stations. And we really appreciate Thurston Community Media. And we have some pioneers in the field that we can really call out and say we really appreciate their legacy, because they helped us become of what we're doing today. And who are they, Mark?
Well, the first we think of is Carol Burns, who passed away in 2013. She's the one that got this whole program started. This is back in about 10, 15 years ago.
She even trained us.
She trained us, she directed, she finally got enough of us trained that we could do it ourselves, and we've been continuing on since she passed away. We also want to remember Bill Oliphant, who was a permanent member of the staff here, who basically, he's the one that put things on the air, if I understood what he did. He was always in that other room.
We could always take stuff into him and he would put it on.
So he made it go out over the airways, and he was a real loss to the community and to TC Media. In addition, we had, when we first started out, we had a number of our chapter members who were crew for this show, who are no longer with us. I want to just remember them. Bob Poteet, who had a career in broadcast journalism, was one of our founding members.
I'm president at one time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Ken Schwilk was also a crew member here, as was Dwayne King. So we had a fairly large presence and had a good crew. So we missed them terribly. In addition to TCM, we also have a voice through Chaos Radio. And I want to give a shout out to John Ford, who hosts the program Once More Into the Breach.
Yeah, he used to be a board member here at TCM.
And there is a relationship between TCM and Chaos Radio. You'll usually see them together at many events, manning the tables.
And John has us over once a month to put on a program.
Yeah, John hosts a weekly program called Once More Into the Breach. It's a talk show about public affairs, issues of note, and once a month on the last Wednesday of each month at 10 a.m. he has Dennis and I
and whoever we invite in.
Come in to talk about topics of the day. And one of the things that gave us an idea for doing this show is some of these are the topics that we discussed on Chaos Radio that over this past year that are still going to be active going into the next year.
And you remember whenever we started the program off and warned the people, you might want to take your heartburn medicine, because some of the stuff is truly upsetting that we have to share. Because we share some issues that is not getting out into the mainstream media as much. But we often say, you know, here's what one side is saying, but to be fair, here's what the other side is saying. And you need to make your own informed decisions.
Right. And we come to it with a point of view. I mean, we are veterans. We've had that experience, and it's certainly informed my way of looking at the world.
So, well, we think we really have an authentic voice when we have served, we've been honorably discharged, and we know what the cost of war is.
We definitely know what it feels like. So all of that is kind of prequel to what we're going to say, why we're here, what we want to say. So I hope you'll stay with us while we talk about a variety of things. And the first thing I wanted to bring up is something that actually we're going to go back into history a little bit. There is a movement now. It was a bill that was introduced into Congress this past July by one of the co-sponsors was our own Representative Denny Heck. And it's called Removing the Stain. And what that is, it's a bill to remove or rescind 20 Congressional Medals of Honor that were awarded to U.S. Army soldiers who were involved in the 1980 Wounded Knee Massacre.
This has never been done before, has it, Mark?
Rescinding medals?
Yeah.
Well, they have.
They have?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'll talk a little bit about that. But this is...
Medals of Honor rescinded.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there has been a change in the nature of the Medal of Honor because during the Civil War and afterwards, it was given out, how would I say, somewhat promiscuously. Oftentimes just as a re-enlistment bonus. At Wounded Knee, which was a massacre of Native Americans by U.S. Army troops, they had accepted the surrender of a group of Minneconjou Lakota in South Dakota, and they disarmed the Lakota and then essentially butchered them. As many as 375 died on the December day in 1890. About 200 of those victims were women and children, according to a later testimony before Congress. Army General Nelson Miles, who was in command of that region, who was not at Wounded Knee at the time, showed up about a few days later and described it as the most abominable criminal military blunder and a horrible massacre of women and children. And you know, he's a hardened Civil War veteran, and he found this very disturbing. So get an idea how bad.
And you know, that used to be called the Wounded Knee Battle, and in 2001 it was changed to massacre.
Officially.
Officially,
yeah.
Yes.
So we're somewhat coming to terms with this, but for the most part it's been ignored. And when General Miles was there, he objected to issuing any medals of honor for this event. But his objections were overridden, and they were awarded. So the Remove the Stain Act, which is House Resolution 3467, seeks to rescind these awards. This has been an objective of the National Congress of American Indians, who has long condemned the massacre and advocated for rescinding this Congressional Medal of Honor.
And why is Veterans for Peace so adamant about this particular issue?
Well, again, we're talking about a war crime. We're talking about the murder of innocent civilians, which is not something you do in combat. There's this idea of combat is somewhat of a, there's an ethic to combat. I mean, you are going out committing heinous acts, you're killing other people, but there are rules. And one of the rules is you don't kill unarmed people.
It also cheapens those who have earned that medal.
And that's why it's also called the Restore the Honor, because yes, when we think about the Medal of Honor these days, we're thinking about great acts of valor, people who risk their lives to save their buddies, who charge machine gun nests, who single-handedly turn the tide of battle, that sort of thing. And here, in the Wounded Knee massacre, we see that we have a conspicuous bravery award to one soldier who rounded up a runaway pack mule. Another soldier was awarded the Medal of Honor for leading 20 men into a ravine where women and children were later found dead or wounded. Another soldier won a Medal of Honor for using a howitzer to lob explosives into women and children in the ravine. So these are not acts of courage or honor. These are acts of murder. So the idea is that we want to make sure that when people think of the Medal of Honor, they think of real honor. They think of real courage and valor, not heinous murder.
And later on, we will talk about war criminals and what that really means. Yeah. But this is a whole issue that Veterans for Peace is behind.
And I mentioned that the Medals of Honor were given out somewhat promiscuously during the 19th century. During 1916 and 17, General Miles headed a congressional inquiry into criteria for bestowing it. And he found that it was doled out rather haphazardly. There were clerical errors that spawned awards, and they also found that 864 medals of honor were given out in the Civil War, not for bravery, but to encourage re-enlistment. So for that reason, Veterans for Peace is a strong supporter of the Remove the Stain Act. And you can go to veteransforpeace.org and search, use the term remove the stain, and it will bring up some links where you can find the petition to Congress to pass this bill. And I mentioned that Denny Heck from this district was one of the co-sponsors. Several others of the original sponsors were Deb Helland from New Mexico, Daniel Kildee from Michigan, Ben Ray Lujan from New Mexico, and they were the original sponsors, and then another 10 members have signed on since. And then in addition, just in the past week or so, a group of senators have announced their intention to introduce a companion bill. And that includes Kamala Harris from California, Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts, Jeff Merkley from Oregon, Ron Wyden, also from Oregon, Patrick Leahy from Vermont, and Bernie Sanders from Vermont. And that bill has not yet been introduced, but should be sometime in the near future. So we'll have two bills moving through Congress. Hopefully they will be moving through Congress. Right now, the House bill has been sitting in committee, awaiting a hearing or some action. So again, I would encourage you to go to Veterans for Peace, look up Remove the Stain, and sign that petition. And if you're really so inclined, once you've gotten the information, contact your member of Congress. And if you are in a district for any of these members who sponsored the bill, then give them a call and thank them.
Yeah, particularly Denny Heck, who is retiring.
Yeah. So it'd be nice, that'd be a real accomplishment to see that this bill would get passed. So I hope it actually happens.
Yes.
So having talked about war crimes, maybe it'd be a good time to talk about the current war crimes.
Oh my goodness, yeah. And particularly when we see a lot of the issues coming up that there's members of VFP that are really concerned about how prosecuting really war criminals is being changed now and pardoned by our current president. And basically, you can take a look at humanejustice.org and prosecuteofficials.org to take a look more at the prosecutions. But it's one thing that I'm looking at is to say U.S. wars and occupations really can be permanently ended by prosecuting high levels of U.S. civilian and military officials who have engaged in crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. And those are very different things. I was looking up, like, aren't they the same? Well, war crimes occurs when superfluous injury or unnecessary suffering is inflicted upon the enemy. It includes such acts as mistreatment of prisoners of war or civilians, and it may only be committed during an armed conflict, whereas crimes against humanity can be committed both in times of war and peace. And it's one thing that I was reading the report that U.S. President Trump was preparing to pardon a number of U.S. war criminals who were both accused and convicted. And it really sparked some outrage from the actions that he was taking.
You're talking about most recently.
The most recent one, yes.
And in some of the cases, they weren't, the process, the Uniform Military Justice process
hadn't even been carried out.
Yeah, they were awaiting trial, at least one of them. So he's interfered with with military justice. And there was an interesting article in The Nation magazine recently, and basically saying that Trump has made the military safe for war criminals. You know, one of the examples was the Chief Petty Officer Edward Gallagher, leader of Navy SEALs, who captured a young Iraqi insurgent one day, and they injured him, so they sedated him. They cut an airway into his throat so he could breathe, and then Gallagher turned around and stabbed him and killed him, and then posed with the corpse. And for that, he was charged with war crime or Actually, I'm not sure if it was actual war crimes, but certainly violations of the Uniform Military Code. This is not something you do in war.
Right. And Trump, you know, has repeatedly expressed his support for torture and atrocity in war. And with the previous pardons, murders in uniform. And, you know, it's really a really hard thing to look at, Mark, when you think, what does that have to do with our soldiers today who are serving in other countries when they see this kind of action taking place?
Well, I guess two things. One is, I think, well, I can do it too because I can be pardoned.
Yeah, and we know that effective impunity for U.S. soldiers in foreign lands is a real problem.
Under the status of forces agreements?
Yes,
Yeah.
and we've had issues that have riled locals, I think of South Korea and Japan and the Philippines, and the perceived impunity of U.S. military personnel have turned the residents against the presence of the military bases that are there.
And in addition, taking this, looking away and not acting on these crimes, not only tells other soldiers that it's okay to do this, it's also telling our allies this is who we are. You know, this is what America is. Also tells our enemies what it is. And if you think about it, if we're doing these things to them, they will likely do them to us if they capture our people.
Well, to the U.S. military's credit, they do go out of their way today now to emphasize the laws of war and the necessity of disobeying illegal orders. And yet, their U.S. actions offer little reassurance that political attitudes have changed.
And in fact, I mean, Trump's championing of these war criminals, it's not wrong because the military is upset about the intervention. It's wrong because it's part of a larger pattern that's to normalize war crimes, as you said, the torture, enhanced interrogations.
Particularly if you can get information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, Trump's idea of combat is it should be savage and mean and ugly, which actually it is, but he's talking about taking it to another level. And it's like he made a promise during his campaign that he complained that American soldiers were being shackled by rules that prevented torture and slaughter.
Yes.
He said, the problem is we have the Geneva Conventions, all sorts of rules and regulations, so soldiers are afraid to fight. We can't waterboard, our adversaries can chop off heads. I think we've got to make some changes, some adjustments. So that's the attitude of the President of the United States. And he can't take America out of the Geneva Conventions, but he can subvert them by creating this atmosphere where you pardon them. And if you want an example of how these things can metastasize, go back to Vietnam and think about all the things that happened there. We always hear about My Lai, which is was kind of the...
And that was just one event.
That was one, but there were many others. In fact, yes. Nick Turse has documented in some of his research of the Vietnam War. It was like we had a My Lai almost every month. And if it wasn't just soldiers shooting people at point-blank range, it was like we were dropping bombs on civilian areas. We had free fire zones, and we basically opened the country up to slaughter.
And indeed, we left munitions there that are still killing people. You know, that really brings us to this whole topic that's hard for our viewing audience who are not veterans to really understand, is the impact of everyday militarism and the fact that military ideas and values and imagery find their way into more and more everyday areas of our life.
And I just saw, there was a shootout in New Jersey just the other day, and I saw a photo of the police responding to it, and they looked pretty much like soldiers. They looked like the people you see in Afghanistan and Iraq. They
many times they've been armed with the same weapons that come from the Department of Defense for the police force.
So it does creep into life, everyday life.
Matter of fact, I've been out in Huntamer Park when the sheriff had their vehicle roll up, and it was painted black and everything, and they had kids climb through it. Pretty scary thing, but then it was the whole purpose of trying to gradually influence today's generation.
And there's a certain attraction to that. I mean, even as much as I am repelled by war and the items of war, you know, getting behind a 50 caliber machine gun and firing it is really an awesome experience. You know, being able to
sort of a high in a way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's how people. I mean, it can. And if you aren't careful, that can get carried away. And even if you don't mean to massacre a bunch of people, it's pretty easy to do with automatic weapons.
Well, you know, everyday militarism can range from military visits to schools, to the Invictus Games, to recruitment leaflets, and it's just. When you consider that, viewed in its simplest, militarism is the belief in the use of force and violence to promote and protect supposed national interests. But, you know, it's interesting to really think about national interests. What does national interest mean? You know, militarist values really affect our attitudes, not only to conflict and war, but also other aspects of power and politics and everyday life.
And it seems like with militarism that's the first idea, first response. Let's go in and shoot someone. Let's send in the Marines. Do you remember Tom Lehrer's song about? Yep. I've forgotten the title of it now, but you know, what do we do? First, we send in the Marines.
Yes. Well, you know, the first claim of militarism is that violence solves conflict. And it's just so incompatible to think about that the majority of conflicts really, does it involve violence? Many times, no, the conflicts don't involve violence, but, you know, militarism really has that. And the second aspect of it, Mark, is unquestioning obedience is something to be admired. Mm-hmm. So it has really a corrosive effect on the ability of both children and adults to think for themselves.
Well, we get used to the idea of force is the right way to go.
Yeah. And so do they speak out when they see something wrong? No. Nationalism, you know, is another aspect of militarism. And that's sort of the scary thing. We're urged to defend the country without any discussion of what we mean by a country.
Mm-hmm. It's ours.
Yeah.
And of course, one of the probably the most profound sights that I've seen in my lifetime is when we had the first photograph of the Earth from outer space. I didn't see any lines. I didn't see any boundaries on Earth.
Yeah. You know, and really national interest implies that every one of us has the same interests. Really? It usually means the interests of those with wealth and power.
And maybe, you know, we all have a common interest in being safe, secure, being able to earn a living and protect our families. I mean, those are very universal interests. But beyond that, how does that translate into going to another country and killing people?
Well, that's true. And militarism really diverts our attention away from the underlying causes of war and injustice. And what do we do today? We celebrate. It focuses on celebrating the armed forces. Mm-hmm. And
we do that both on Veterans Day and Memorial Day and probably throughout the year. I mean,
yeah, and what were they originally for?
I know Memorial Day came out as a day to remember the war dead. Veterans Day actually was Armistice Day, which was a day of peace.
And we called it Armistice Day for quite a while.
Yeah, Woodrow Wilson proclaimed the first Armistice Day on November 11th, 1919, and he talked about it in terms of recognizing the peace, the end of the war. When in 1926, I believe, it was actually began to be observed as Armistice Day. Yeah, Congress officially recognized the end of World War I when it passed a concurrent resolution on June 4th in 1926. And it said, "It is fitting that the recurring anniversary of this date should be commemorated with thanksgiving and prayer and exercises designed to perpetuate peace through goodwill and mutual understanding between nations." So, 12 years later, it was established as a legal holiday, as a day to be dedicated to the cause of world peace. So that was how we celebrated Armistice Day until 1954, when it became Veterans Day to honor Americans' veterans for their patriotism, love of country, and willingness to serve and sacrifice for the common good. Mm-hmm. So what we've done, both with Veterans Day and Memorial Day, is it becomes a celebration of militarism, and it's
a recruiting tool.
And it's all hidden behind the veneer of the hero soldiers, because we're all heroes now.
Yeah. And you know, this whole culture of militarism is perpetuated through popular culture today. And you talk about hero, and how do you get to be a hero? Well, you get your parents to buy you a gun to come home, you know, and so you can become the hero. And we see that the government counts on significant public support and uses popular culture symbols, and particularly after 9/11. Yes. 9/11 was tragic, but it became normal for patriotic fervor to once again be communicated through toys and entertainment. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm a retired educator, so I took a look at, well, what do our kids get exposed to? And so I went to some of the local box stores where children's games were. What did I find, Mark? I found all kinds of war toys, including tanks that you could sit upon. A 3-year-old who, in the box would say, brings out the bloodthirsty lust. In a 3-year-old? You know, and you see some of the other things, makes realistic sounds, you know, and so you see this, and the thing that really got me was during the Easter season, an Easter egg basket, rather than have Easter eggs, had hand grenades. And that was, you know, the toys that we use, and this whole socialization of toy soldiers and play weapons, teach our children the art of war, and that's been done over many centuries.
And you and I had some of the same indoctrination growing up. I recall having military-style rifles. I recall having, playing war. We had all the thrilling scenes from the various movies.
Yeah, and so this whole acceptance of violence and fears about security are transferred to us at a very early development stage.
And that there are people out there to get us. And when I was growing up, it was the communists in the Soviet Union. They were definitely coming over to take us.
Yes. And you know, I came across a new term, maybe you've heard of it too, called killology. And that was Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, who was an expert in killology. And basically, he said that it's a science of killing. Killing must be taught. And here's his quote, Mark. Children don't naturally kill. They learn it from violence in the home, and most pervasively from violence as entertainment in television, movies, and interactive video games. And boy, I've seen a lot of the video games and other type of things where it gets, as a matter of fact, one of the video games you play online, and who collects the data for this? You're right, you got a high score. You may get a call from the recruiter.
Arlo Guthrie pointed that out back in the, late 80s about, Space Invaders. They always wanted to, if you have the high score, they wanted to know who you were.
Well, and and just recently we saw kids brought guns to school and killed. But you notice their parents never did. What happened that the kids now bring guns to the school? their whole psychological inhibition against violent activity has changed.
So basically they've been conditioned like we are in the military to kill.
Yeah.
Except
So
they're not in the
they
military.
took the safety catch off of the nation, basically. And we see this whole thing which Roger Stahl called militainment, which basically is entertainment where it presents a clean war without victims or bodies or suffering. And it makes war appear sanitized and aesthetically even beautiful. And so young people appear to have become desensitized. And we see that the military entertainment complex, Hollywood, an example, has relied upon the Department of Defense. Multinational corporations such as General Electric, have produced films, and they are consonant with a militaristic culture. And so from a very young age, our U.S. residents are groomed to enlist to become foot soldiers in the U.S. military.
And then once you join, they show you all kinds of ways to kill and maim.
Yep. And the Pentagon officials even do line edit scripts. Can you believe that? They look at the Hollywood script and they edit it.
Oh, when they're involved in the production?
When they're involved in the production, yeah.
So it's kind of a continuum. You get people used to the idea, war is honorable, war isn't something important, and look, you've been playing with these guns, it's just something that's in your nature, and now you're starting to think about, well, I'm in the military, so it's just, yes, it's right.
Yeah.
And you talked about killology. It reminded me of Nick Turse's line, kill anything that moves.
Yes, Nick Turse.
I recall, I've forgotten whose T-shirt it was. I want to say it might have been this from Vietnam era. A T-shirt said, kill them all, let God sort it out.
And they now play first-person shooter games. They fly bombing missions. And it really is an alluring, militarized world of fun. And it makes the intersection with the military second nature to today's Americans.
So that's one of the things that we trying to do with Veterans for Peace, which is break that connection. We're talking about there are alternatives to war, to militarism, and we want to see those explored and implemented as opposed to just ongoing reflexive militarism.
In Iraq, Mark, they banned toy guns. Iraq, it banned toy guns because they were concerned that they were creating a culture of violence that would be transmitted to the following, generations. Yeah, and they've of course experienced our invasion and the weapons and everything we brought and back and forth and ISIS and you name it, and so they basically said, no, we are going to ban weapons. I have a quote by a gentleman whose last name is Davies in 2011. He says, when children are using toy guns, they are thinking that they are a hero.
Mm-hmm.
So,
because when we were using those toy guns, even if we got killed, we never thought of ourselves with our arms blown off or our guts blown open. It was always just we fell down on the ground and then we got back up and killed someone else.
And militarism is pervasive in the current administration.
I'm shocked.
Yeah. And we see some of the threats of the military action where against Venezuela, Cuba, North Korea, Syria, Iran. And speaking about ISIS in Syria, candidate Trump then says, I would bomb the SHIT out of them. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
and he would kill the family members.
Yeah, and he said that he would bomb the oil facilities that ISIS controlled. And what was he going to do? Well, he would rebuild that, quote, sucker and brand it new and beautiful, and then he would take the oil. And President Trump has threatened North Korea. Remember the phrase, fire and fury. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and has never been seen before, which means something larger than nuclear. And John Bolton advocated a regime change, And Trump is really actively engaged in regime change in Venezuela. And so we see that what's happened? Well, a whole new Cold War and nuclear arms race with Russia has begun.
And of course, one thing to keep in mind that, we're talking about the current administration and Donald Trump. This is not unique to Donald Trump or the Republican Party. The Democrats have also, throughout the post-World War II era, also participated in this. Obama didn't end the wars. He sent more troops.
No. Well, and you and I are both veterans from the Vietnam era.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was in uniform then, it was both under Republican and Democrat presidents. And it didn't get me out any sooner. Not until we as veterans says, I'm not going to fight anymore.
Right.
And our people at home says, and I'm not going to fund this war anymore. And then suddenly they declared, okay, we won, let's go home.
And keep in mind, Richard Nixon was elected in 1968 with a promise, with a secret plan to end the war. Almost 2 years to the day after he was inaugurated, I went on my first combat patrol in Vietnam. So his secret plan to end the war was kind of long.
Yeah. Martin Luther King said, conscience asks the question, is it right? And there are times when you must take a stand that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but you must do it because it's right.
Mm-hmm. And it can be, as I said, it can be dangerous.
That's right. And he also said, we must see now that the evils of racism, economic exploitation, and militarism are all tied together. And you can't get rid of one without getting rid of the other.
Mm-hmm. And I also seem to recall that he said that he said that my country, the United States of America, is the greatest purveyor of violence on the face of the earth.
Yes.
This was in 1967, and it probably hasn't changed. We have the large arsenals, we have the weapons, we have the bases.
President John F. Kennedy said, war will exist until that distant day when the conscientious objector enjoys the same reputation and prestige as the warrior does today.
And that hasn't happened yet, so
hasn't
we still have
yet.
war. And
Yeah.
actually, and speaking of, so we're talking about veterans. One topic that we have addressed and want to bring out to the public's attention about deported veterans.
Yes.
Any number of non-citizens have served in the military, and that's always been considered a path into for citizenship. And there have been, like for a while there, you could be sworn as a citizen during basic training. And now what we're finding is veterans can serve, they come out, and if they haven't, they still aren't, they have not been naturalized, and if they have any kind of crime in their background, drug bust, sometimes.
Or acting out because of PTSD and the things that they've been exposed to in combat.
End up being deported. And interestingly enough, if you look up the question, how many U.S. veterans have been deported, you're not going to find an answer. In fact,
and why is that, Mark?
Because they don't know. The U.S. General Accountability Office did a review of procedures for deporting veterans, and there are some very specific procedures. When ICE agents and officers learn they encountered a potentially removable veteran, ICE policies require them to take additional steps to proceed with the case. What GAO found is that ICE did not consistently follow those policies involving veterans who were placed in removal proceedings. They haven't developed a policy to identify and document military veterans at encounters during interviews. And even when they learn that they're dealing with veterans, they don't maintain a complete electronic data. So they don't really have any reasonable assurance that they're consistently following the policies for handling veterans. And because they don't have this data, they don't know exactly how many veterans have been deported. Currently, there's a group in Tijuana. We have 2 VFP chapters in Mexico. One's in Tijuana, I think one's in Baja California.
Yes.
The one in Tijuana also operates, there's a group that operates the Deported Vets House. And you can find them at deportedvetshouse.org. And that's a support organization for veterans who've been deported. Some of you may have seen the display on Veterans Day, where the deported veterans have a ceremony in Tijuana where they salute the American flag. I mean, they still hold to, have some faith in the country, in the United States. They're still looking for to, I guess, get that citizenship that they earn. But they're in Mexico. They can't really do much. So.
And what's the only way that they can get back to the United States today once they've been deported?
Well, actually, I mean, there's various ways, but the only way guaranteed is that they can die and be buried in the United States. They're entitled to a military funeral and interment in a national cemetery.
And even though they've earned benefits for their physical and mental issues that they received from being honorably serving, they can't get across the border to get those benefits.
Yeah, they can't come and get their health benefits. They can file for disability compensation, but they're not going to be able to come to their compensation and pension exams. Any number of veterans benefits require you to be in the are set up for veterans who are in the United States. So here we have a cohort of veterans who are honorably discharged, but can't access the benefits to which they're entitled.
And you know, Mark, you and I were both in Spokane recently for the National Convention for Veterans for Peace, and they had a panel sharing about deported veterans, and I talked to several and learned things I never learned, like when you are an immigrant serving overseas, your family can be deported while you are serving, and you can come back home and, where's my family? They've been deported.
Imagine what that does to your concentration while you're in a life and death situation.
Yeah, then you come home yourself and you can be deported as well. And sometimes for just very simple things as how do I handle my trauma that I've received in Afghanistan most recently, and often they will use some drugs that are not legal.
And some that are legal.
And some that are, but even if they are, it's not recognized by, the government at the time, and so they can be arrested at the time and then, quick deportation.
And one of the things that's prompted this is ICE and DOD have sort of responded to the Trump administration's hostility toward immigrants by ratcheting down. They're accepting fewer non-citizens into the military these days. They are now they're doing enhanced background checks, which takes longer, so the process doesn't necessarily happen while they're in service. Department of Defense has also said that your length of time required to qualify for naturalization has now been lengthened. So you may not qualify while you're in the military. So you come out and you're a veteran, but you haven't achieved that citizenship yet. In the meantime, ICE has done this. They're saying if a veteran who's already in the program, they are saying they have to go through this additional enhanced background check before they'll even begin the process. And again, that can drag it out. So people come back from this military service, and that naturalization has not gone through. So some of this is what we see, just the overall policy of the Trump administration toward immigrants.
Well, and this enhanced background check, we both have a friend that who has experienced his neighbors living next to him being questioned by basically agents rolling up in unmarked vehicles almost, with dark tinted windows rolling down, coming in. Do you know this, person living next to you, with a hint like, they could be a terrorist living next to you, and it is sort of like unbelievable. And when the customs enforcement is supposed to check on the people they pick up to see if they are military veterans before kicking them out of the country.
Yeah.
And they're not.
They're very inconsistent about that. So if you're an immigrant and you're serving in the military, you really want to make sure you understand the process and get as much of your paperwork in order as quickly as you can. And to a certain degree, you can't do that because this process is being stretched out. You know, so it used to be that you could get naturalized by the end of your basic training program. That has been cut out. So
yeah.
So now you have to, rather than having it be somewhat of an automatic process, you have to go through these procedures to apply, move the paperwork, and many veterans don't know that. Their command is not all that interested in, because basically the command is interested in, we've got bodies here, we want them, you know, we're concerned with the mission. This is something else. So if you've ever tried to deal with a personnel, human resources problem in a civilian environment, it can be even more complicated in the military.
You know, I'm really pleased that Veterans for Peace, our national office, is the fiscal sponsor for the Unified Deported Veterans. And
now, is that a bill that's being introduced, or is that?
No, they are. They are the fiscal sponsor of these.
For this organization.
For this organization, yeah. And particularly the Unified Deported Veterans, that's the Hector Barrios Chapter 182. And so, you know, I'm really pleased that our national office is very involved in this particular
So
one.
keep an eye on this issue. It's not going to go away, because we've relied on immigrants for our military throughout our history. And now we're no longer keeping faith with those people who've been willing to serve.
Well, Mark, I know we only have about 9 minutes left, but boy,
We still got a bunch.
it's sort of like when we're on Chaos Radio, like, boy, that time goes by. And we have the Mission Act, we have nuclear weapons, this whole issue of impeachment. What does that mean? You know, how do you want to handle it, Mark?
Okay, well, let me take a few minutes to talk about nuclear weapons.
Okay.
I've been active in that.
Yeah, tell our viewing audience, how have you been involved on that?
And VFP has been active, yes. I'm going to point out that after the uncertainty and the threats of the 1960s, the US and USSR nuclear standoff, the countries of the world came together and decided, we're going to make a deal. 191 nations, including 5 recognized nuclear nations, the US, USSR, China, England, and France, and the non-nuclear nations agreed that basically the 5 nuclear nations would eliminate their arsenals and the other nations would not pursue nuclear weapons. That's the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Yes. You hear it talked about very often with respect to Iran. And the non-nuclear nations mostly have kept their side of the bargain. A few haven't, but the nuclear nations have not. We still have.
And there are 9 countries that own almost in the entirety of the 14,500 nuclear weapons on Earth. And 9 countries.
And 2 of them own the overwhelming majority of them.
93%.
Yeah,
Russia and United States.
So the thing to keep in mind, I mean, nuclear weapons have gone out of the national consciousness because everybody seems to think, well, the Cold War is over, but they're still there. And we've had treaties, we've ratcheted down the number of active nuclear weapons. Right now, U.S. and Russian arsenals we have roughly 1,500 nuclear weapons each that are active, targeted, on ready alert. But we also have another 6,000 that are stockpiled or stored, so they're still there. They can be put into use. And in addition to the 5 recognized nuclear nations, we have several countries that did not sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty. That would include Pakistan, India, Israel, and South Sudan. And of those 4, Pakistan, India, and Israel all have nuclear weapons.
Yes.
North Korea was in it, and then they backed out, and they also have nuclear weapons. So the weapons are still there. And then more recently, the Obama administration agreed to a nuclear weapons modernization program. I use that term advisedly. And it was basically, they said, we'll agree to a modernization program, which is actually basically rebuilding and reconstituting our nuclear arsenal, if the Senate would pass the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty in 2011, which they did. Subsequently, when the Trump administration came into office, they conducted what's called a nuclear posture review, and that's a periodic review of how and why we have nuclear weapons. How are we going to use them? What for? And what they did is basically lowered the threshold for using nuclear weapons. Under the Obama administration, you know, the United States said we would not use nuclear weapons against any country that was compliant with the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but we would use them against other nuclear nations. Well, now that limit has been removed. We say the posture review says we will use them under any circumstance we choose. And by the way, it used to be that we would only use nuclear weapons in response to a nuclear attack, and now a variety of attacks are eligible for a nuclear response. And of course, we have one person who has his finger on the button, mostly, which is dangerous. So with all that as preface, I'll point out that VFP and the Rachel Corrie chapter are been very active in the movement to abolish nuclear weapons. One of the founding principles of Veterans for Peace is a call to end the arms race, and leading to the end of the ultimate elimination of nuclear weapons. VFP is a member of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which is a coalition of non-governmental organizations in 100 countries promoting adherence and implementation of the United Nations Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And this treaty was adopted by an overwhelming vote of the General Assembly in 2017. None of the nuclear nations voted at all. They just boycotted the whole thing. But the treaty has gone into effect because over 80 countries have signed on to the treaty. Another 34 have ratified them. So essentially what we're doing is saying nuclear weapons we're putting nuclear weapons in the same category that we put chemical weapons, biological weapons, landmines. We're saying they're not permitted. You shouldn't have them. And we're trying to create a new norm with saying nuclear weapons are not acceptable.
What are you doing locally on this one, Mark?
And then here locally, the Rachel Corrie chapter, we are an active member of the Olympia Coalition to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which is part of a larger statewide coalition of Washington against the nuclear weapons. So here, we meet the third Thursday of every month, and and we have a speakers bureau. We're looking to reach out to the community, the broader community, to talk about what nuclear weapons are and what the dangers are. So we have a speakers bureau. We're putting together a course that we offer through the Unitarian Church program this winter, and then we also go out every Thursday on overpass on I-5 with a big banner that says "Abolish Nuclear Weapons," and just one form of outreach. Get a lot of good response from that.
Good, good.
So maybe this will be the year that we actually eliminate nuclear weapons. I'd like to think that. So we are definitely running out of time. So any last things we want to cover before the
Well, we just want to encourage people to go to our website, veteransforpeace.org, and you can look on any one of the issues that we've been talking about and more too, because there's a lot of things that are going on, and currently we're seeing a lot of issues going on about impeaching Trump, and there's going to be an awful lot of issues coming up that our viewing audience really needs to be well informed. And that's where I really want to thank Thurston Community Media for giving us a place to where we can say, here are some of the things you really need to know.
Okay, well, with all that, it's probably time to wrap up. So just, like I say, we've covered a lot of ground in the past hour. We didn't cover some things that we thought we might. But one thing, message should be clear. So war and militarism profit the few at the expense of many.
Yes. And
Marine General Smedley Butler stated this fact very bluntly. He said, "War is a racket. It always has been. It is possibly the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious. It is the only one international in scope. It is the only one in which the profits are reckoned in dollars and the losses in lives." And as Veterans for Peace, our goal is to end this deadly racket. So we hope the information we presented in this program will enable you to see through the lies and deceptions that are a hallmark of a militarized nation. So thank you for watching, and peace always.
Yes, thank you for watching.